Hello, everyone. Thank you for staying throughout the day, throughout the whole afternoon, and joining us for the third session. Sorry, there's no intermission. We'll just continue the excitement and carry on the conversation. Yeah. So we are in this third session of today, which have to do with the subject of time. Before I get started, let me just briefly introduce both speaker and also collaborators on multiple occasions. I think Tzu Nyen is the gravity of this gathering today, and the reason why we are here shouldn't require an extra introduction, but I would like to highlight one of the review of the exhibition, which is from Straits Time, named you as the artist that released the dark history, release the tigers in Asia's dark history, right? Very profound confirmation of your work. But at the meantime, because we are at the end of the exhibition, so if you haven't seen the show downstairs, I highly recommend you to spend some time with the exhibition today, tomorrow. At 4 p.m., one of the curators, Celine Yap, is going to have the curator guide tour as well. So feel free to join that. In the meantime, we have Hsu Chia-Wei. Chia-Wei also is quite a familiar name in Singapore. Chia-Wei is an artist, filmmaker, curator. I will also say community organizer from Taiwan. Chia-Wei did her CCA residency in 2017 and was also one of the participating artists for the Every Step in the Right Direction Singapore Biennale 2019. And he is also one of the very important member of artist collective called Open Contemporary Taiwan in Taiwan, based in Taipei. So I think without further ado, we'll carry on the conversation. But also we need to mention the reason why we pair them. If you do not have the handout with you, they are co-curator for the 17th edition of Asian Art Biennale titled The Strangers from Beyond the Mountain and the Sea. This is right before COVID, 2019. And that is really a textbook reminder for us to really see the importance of artistic practitioner to participating in the conversation, such as, like the eco-crisis and the intersection with colonial history. And they have been knowing each other, and we have drawn a lot of parallel with their practices. So I think I will just jump right ahead and into the conversation of what we just saw. As you can tell, every session we utilize a small movie images, video work from Tzu Nyen's body of work. And I think it's quite unique. We decided to title this particular session discussion as cinema. So I think cinema in this particular conversation is in fact a kind of thought devices to help us to unpack the kind of parallel, in a sense, also resonant artistic journey between Tzu Nyen and Chia-Wei. So following the screening of Bohemian Rhapsody project, this is 2006, right? I think it will be quite interesting to also just, talk about the type of nature, quality, and character of the work which have to do with the size specificity and the performativity that facilitate this particular apparatus, which is very present for both of the work, which is the apparatus of cinema. So maybe we can start probably from Chia-Wei, and with a particular work, we will discuss Tzu Nyen's Bohemian Rhapsody. Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm appreciated that the Singapore Museum invited me to join this conversation with Fang-Tze and Tzu Nyen. And so I prepared some thoughts that I read from Tzu Nyen's work. And okay, maybe let's go first slide. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Actually, there are many similarities between Tzu Nyen and my practice. And I think we share many common interests, which coincidentally are presented in a different stage of our work. So in this conversation, although I will be discussing Tzu Nyen's works today, but actually I'm using my own working method to understand his works. I talk about Tzu Nyen, but it can partly say I am talking about myself as well. So since Tzu Nyen used several filmmaking production ways in his work, what I would like to share is the transformation of his working method in dealing with time and space from early work to later works. So maybe let's start with the work we watched before, the Bohemian Rhapsody project. In this early work by Tzu Nyen, we can see that he shot the film in an actual court. And there's a boy is on trial. And also different Singaporean ethnicities are surrounded and they play in different roles. So we can see there are lights and microphone camera used for filming in the scene. And those equipment, which is not supposed to be seen in the image, is laid bare. And from here, we can see the role of this, I call first level of off-screen. Firstly, the film generally focuses on the object in front of the camera, but here we see the filming equipment, which is the first level of screen. So we also see the action itself of filming. This setting creates two-level narrative. The first is the narrative scene in front of the camera, interpreting something that happened the other time. It's a fictional scene. And the second is the real filming event. Something is happening right now in 2006 when the actual filming took place. So we see the story and action of storytelling itself. Through this kind of filming action, we sense the distance between the artist himself and another fictional time and space. So one is present and the other is the past. And secondly, this actor play a character in a fictional world, but also play themselves. Yeah. And furthermore, this filming place is a real low cost. So this image not only shows the fictional scene inside the screen, but also reflects the real people and things in off-screen. And the third part, many works in Tzu Nyen's exhibition are close to the theater. We can think about it from the point of view of the off-screen I just mentioned. There's another meaning of off-screen in the film studies. In general, the off-screen of a film is its worldview. For example, if the character walk to a place outside the screen, even we can see him, but we still know the character exists somewhere in the story. It doesn't mean that the character disappears from the story. The character just goes somewhere we can see from the screen. So the off-screen in the film is a fictional world. is still in the story. But the off-screen in the theater is quite different. If a character leaves the stage, we know that the character has gone backstage and is no longer play a role in the story. The character becomes an actor himself. Because the audience and the character are coexisting in a physical space, we are aware that there is another real space behind the stage. So the off-screen in the theater is a physical space. It's in the real world. And the off-screen of Tzu Nyen exposing his filming equipment, which I just mentioned, will give rise to a real-world off-screen space similar to a theater space. If we look at Tzu Nyen's exhibition from this perspective, we can find this kind of off-screen characteristic in the work. For example, 2 or 3 tigers. We can see that the projector's light, sometimes hidden behind, is just used to project an image and serve for the fictional world. But sometimes it's play the role of light itself in the exhibition space. It's an element that coexists with the audience in the same physical space, just like the camera equipment in the shooting event or the backstage in the theater. So we can also find out that shadow puppetry or like giant electric fans and the Japanese style room with tatami all have this kind of theatricality. And so this is how I look at the space of film and visual art exhibition from this off-screen concept. Yeah, this is my first answer. And I'm thinking today I'm going to use some like a cinematic perspective to read 3 different steps of Tzu Nyen's work.
Thanks for that perspective and the analysis. And I think my part today, I will just kind of jump in between Chia-Wei's three sections that he will speak about. And I just wanted to share some thoughts on Bohemian Rhapsody. I think I haven't seen it for 10 years or something. So yeah. So it was interesting for me to have seen it. Prior to the talk, I prepared some notes on what I would say about Bohemian Rhapsody, but suddenly after watching it, they don't seem so relevant anymore. The first thing which maybe I will share a little bit about is the context of the work. So this was the first Singapore biennial. It was commissioned for the first Singapore biennial where we could stage the biennial in the former court rooms. So it seemed like a great opportunity to make use of the court rooms. And of course, in Singapore, we have the death penalty. And that thought, I couldn't kind of forget that when I'm working in the courtrooms. So that's basically how I thought about the Bohemian Rhapsody, which seems to me, if you read the lyrics, is a kind of a plea of someone who's about to be sentenced to death. So what we've seen from Bohemian Rhapsody was actually an audition. So all the footage we see are live audition footage. So the young men who come, they are dressed in the yellow jumpsuits and they are immediately put in handcuffs. But everybody else in the courtroom is rehearsed. So the policemen and the angels and the judges are all rehearsed. Only the auditionee doesn't have no idea what is happening at all. They just thought that they came to audition for a role in a movie called Bohemian Rhapsody. So the nice part of the story is that everyone who came for audition got the role because they all appeared in the film. Right? The second thing, which has a little bit to do with time, which I suddenly remembered when I was watching the video, was that the whole video is edited down to 6 minutes and 52 seconds, if I remember correctly. which is the duration of the original song Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. At that time, it was famous as the longest duration, like for pop song, that made it to #1 on the charts. And every line spoken is edited in sync with the original utterance that Freddie Mercury was singing about. So all of this is kind of the background of the work, and I use these parameters to help me decide on the editing, right? And sorry. Yeah, and I maybe wanted to share a little bit about the sites. Question of site specificity, which Fang-Tze brought out, which was kind of interesting. A few days ago, Chia-Wei was asking me a little bit about this question of site specificity, and I started thinking that actually Bohemian Rhapsody is a strange kind of site specificity, because it's not referring to a specific case in court, and there's no specific protagonist that I'm interested in. So in some ways, it's very non-specific, yeah. But at the same time, it is in a courtroom, and there was something in the process of the courtroom that interested me in a very specific way. So I would say that, I was thinking about this, and I would say that in a way, for me, I would call it mechanism specific. It's not really specific to the site. It's specific to the mechanism of one operation of the law, which is in judging and selecting and being able to order organic bodies, like whether to put them in prison or put them to death. And that was the process for me that kind of conflated with the audition. In the audition, basically the director judges and kind of rearranges like bodies. So this was, something that kind of struck me during our conversations. The other thing which Chia-Wei brought up, which was, highly fascinating, the breakdown between off-screen cinematic space and I would say the off-stage space, And so this is quite obvious as something that is kind of folded into the work. But for me, whenever we expose the cameras and the lights, the immediate notion is that we are exposing the truth of that event, of how it is made. But for me, at the same time, it only produces yet another layer of fiction, because showing those very mechanisms is something staged. So rather than exposing the truth as this kind of like essence, I would say it pretends to perform that truth, only to produce another deeper layer of a screen, another off-screen, outside of the off-screen, yeah. And that kind of layering, is something I would say I'm very much kind of drawn to in a lot of my works, which is that there is no end to it. There is no climax, It only perpetually extends itself. And maybe the last note I would talk about is because we hear the word theater, and this is something very critical to me. Many of my collaborators come from the theater and performing arts. And a lot of my work is indeed kind of like theatrical. But I would say at the same time, what I'm interested in is not theater, but the theatrical. So I'm interested in the theatrical as a mode, but not as a discipline. And the theatrical, as I understand it, is simply that moment when the work looks back at the audience. So that for me is theatricality. So for example, I feel theatrical today because I feel that eyes gaze is on me. So I start to behave theatrically because I'm self-conscious, So that for me is actually my interest in the theatrical, that it pushes you out of the work because I start to behave theatrically, and you feel uncomfortable, But the opposite of the theatrical, I would say, is the absorption, when we are lost or absorbed or immersed in a fiction or a drama. Yeah. So maybe just these 3 short notes, and I should move to the next slide.
Following that note on theatrical, we can probably kind of get a sense how much love both the artists has invested in the sense of cinema. In fact, Chia-Wei wrote an MA thesis on Anna Sandra Films, which is a production house. So both authors have huge knowledges in terms of the history of cinema in itself. And that also manifests throughout their body of work. So thinking about layer, I think later on we're going to move this layer, which is directional, to a less directional with rhizomic. But before that, I would like to also hear from both of you. How do you also engage with that internal mechanism of cinematic history? And how do you also utilize that? In a sense, how do you utilize cinema not just as a trope in this sense, but also an interscalar vehicle, which Tzu Nyen used that phrase, how cinema takes us travel through multiple scale of time, down to the history, down to the present, and down to supposedly a cinematic time we share when we are watching the work in the gallery spaces. Chia-Wei?
Yeah, from this question, I would like to discuss about also start from the off-screen concept, but we can see that after 2014, Tzu Nyen did less and less actual filming in his work, but instead edit ready-made video material to compose his work. I think this is a method to prevent the works from falling into representing a story. But why do we need to avoid this? This is because many ideological and national narrative often use storytelling method. So when we use moving image as our practice method, we have to think about how to avoid this kind of ideological production logic to get rid of the ideological framework. And we can also see, we can use the other kind of off-screen meaning to read Tzu Nyen's work. In the Bohemian Rhapsody project, Tzu Nyen appropriated a song by the band Queen, right? And it's a very famous song that many audience have heard. So the song is outside the story, and the whole content of the work is supplemented by the audience original background knowledge. So the audience are looking at both the actual image itself and the existing context they link to the image. And as we can see in the name and the name list, there is no actual filming at all. And even the image are already made. And Tzu Nyen become like a DJ. He not shooting the film himself, but editing the existing film. In the name list, Tzu Nyen used many film clips that Tony Leung had shot in the past. Many viewers have seen these famous film clips. Once they see the screen, they immediately know which film it's from. So this existing film context become the off-screen of the Tzu Nyen's work, like the Marvel film. There's a universe of Tony Leung films behind the image. From this perspective, I would like to discuss how the element time becomes a way to break from the ideological framework in Tzu Nyen's video works. Usually when we watch a feature film, it takes us about 2 hours. But in the movie, the story may about several weeks long, several years, or even an era or a lifelong story. This is a unique kind of time in a feature film. And the view of time is in most feature films seems to be written using a kind of periodization of history method. In the study of history, periodization of history is often used to divide time into different periods or dynasties. And politics always is the main element. So we can see that national narrative often consolidates ideologies throughout this kind of view of history. And the time frame often overlap with the ideological frame. So to me, breaking the time frame of a feature film is like breaking the ideological framework. And first level, in the name and the nameless, the image that appear in this work are only actions, not events. For example, we can only see Tony Leung light a cigarette or jump without the cause and effect story before or after. The timing of action that have been breaking of both ends and overlaps with the audience present time in the exhibition site. The times to light a cigarette are the exact time the audience is there. The audience are not flying into the story, they still stay in the exhibition. And the second level is that this action comes from different times in the original film. It's like Tzu Nyen is editing those different time and space. Through this way, he breaks down the concept of periodization of history. Then we can see the character Lai Tek in the Nameless as a triple agent. He cannot be tolerated in any established ideological framework. We cannot use the existing ideology to judge whether he's a hero or a traitor. I think Tzu Nyen chose this topic to question history and the national narrative. He also realized the risk of using moving image. So in terms of image manipulation, he used the editing method like DJ, not to produce image, but to edit them, to break the history of the past and also break the ideological framework. Yeah. This is how I see the time element, like how Tzu Nyen work on this about, yeah.
Thanks for that. Yeah, thank you for this analysis, which open up my own understanding as well, or gives me different ways of sort of articulating my own thoughts, right? And I would, going back to the question of like using ready-made images or found images and creating another story with it in relation to time, I would just say, that for me, that there must be at least two different sets of time in a work like The Nameless. So first of all, there is the time of the audience in the present, listening to the story of Lai Tek and interpreting the text in relation to the image. So that's one timeline. And the way I like to imagine it is that there's always another second timeline happening, which Chia-Wei kind of describes as this off-screen, time. And that is the time of recollection, the time in which the audience possibly is recollecting where they might have seen this clip of Tony Leung before, and trying to remember which film is this and where and how was I when I saw this many years ago. So for me, this double temporality is, I would say, a core kind of conceptual, starting point for using the Nameless, for using Tony Leung's films to make the Nameless. And I think it was very interesting for me to link that to the content or subject matter of the Nameless, which is essentially about this figure who up to today we still don't know his real name. We only know him by his 30 different aliases. He's unrepresentable, a traitor. And a traitor always, for us, when we hear the word traitor, it immediately evokes very intense kind of moral sentiments. We have very little tolerance for traitors. For example, they are put to death, right, like by law. And I always think what troubles us with a traitor is this fundamental unrepresentability, this instability, this being which is not a being, and that disturbs us maybe in a way that's similar to actors who do not play by rules that other people have established. So for example, pirates, which do not follow the rules of nation states, they kind of trouble us, right? So I think it was interesting for me to hear this link. And I just wanted to show these two images. These are both from the work 𝐒𝐿 𝘕𝘴𝑰𝑎. So the obvious link to the Nameless is that these are also this work also uses a lot of found footage. Largely the films of Yasujiro Ozu, the great Japanese director. And I used it to tell the stories of various Japanese protagonists through the Second World War. But before going there, I wanted to draw your attention to this image on the right. This was taken in the original site of where 𝐒𝐿 𝘕𝑴𝑰𝑎 was first commissioned. This is in Toyota City, and this building is called the Kirakuté, which I guess translates to happiness, joyous happiness pavilion. Yeah. And this image that you see here is an image of a squadron of kamikaze pilots. They are called the Kusanagi unit. So we also, in 𝐒𝐿 𝘕𝑴𝑰𝑎 here, we tell their story as well. But this squadron of kamikaze pilots came to the Kirakuté and had their kind of like final celebrations before they left on their first and I would say last mission, which was crashing into American ships in Okinawa. And this same room where we installed the work is exactly where the pilots were gathered, right? So I just wanted to show this as a different kind of like site specificity, going back to what I said about Bohemian Rhapsody not being site-specific, right? But on the right, we have an image which is taken from Yasujiro Ozu's films. The only thing I did with the image was to erase all their faces. And one reason I used Ozu partially was because he spent the war years in Singapore trying to make a propaganda film about Subhas Chandra Bose. But the other main reason was that if you look at this image, you see that the perspective of the shots almost aligns with the perspective of how this work is staged, right? So audience have to sit on the tatami floor and they look at characters seated on the tatami in the images. And Ozu has always been famous for his low camera to shoot characters that are seated on tatami. And this required a shift of the body in order to watch the image. And this was kind of important to me. As this specificity is a different type of specificity, the specificity of the body when we are watching an image, as opposed to, let's say, a typical museum proportions, which are usually high ceilings with projectors planted very high up, and we are seated on chairs, which we can say perhaps is a Western kind of architectural proportions that we have inherited. But to kind of look at this moment of Japanese, in a certain sense through Japanese eyes, it maybe requires a Japanese kind of posture of like being seated on the tatami. Yeah. So I just wanted to share this and we can move on. Yeah.
I think this is really wonderful to also get a chance to unpack a little bit of Tzu Nyen's work that's shown downstairs. But I think also at the meantime, it's a little bit due to the time limit, we won't have time to dive into also some of 𝑗ia-Wei's work. But I don't want to miss out the chance because some of you might be interesting. Because in parallel of, I believe, Hotel Opera, it is a work that really touches upon that transition moment right after World War II, right at the end of World War II, and transition into particularly very important period for East Asia, Southeast Asia, beginning of the Cold War. In fact, the parallel work that has been shown in the previous slide of 𝘠𝘠𝑗ia-Wei's work, which he is actually thinking through the body of work in order to also engage with Tzu Nyen's work, is the body of work, a series of work titled Huimo Village in Ruins of Intelligence Bureau, which is 2015. It's a very important work that touches upon the current Golden Triangle and the dispute region, how the international Cold War has its presence in the villages till today. So thinking about this type of moment, thinking about cinema, I think it's quite appropriate for us to also point out the notion of cinematic time, which I'm referred to Marianne Doan's. That's one of the very important books thinking about the emergence of cinematic time. And I think in this book, she particularly pointed out how cinema born in a period when the battle over contingency, determinism, and meanings was strongly embodied both epistemologically and in its domination historical development of cinema. Cinema has become the narrativization of chances and the historicalization of present. So in a sense, both of their work can kind of come very closely in conversation with this emergence of cinematic time and this moment, not just as entertainment, but also the kind of dominational mechanism of the present contemporary time till today. I think before we move on to the conversation on the modality of thinking, I also want to hear from both of you, because in a sense, in the recent period, also maybe in different moment, but there's a parallel tendency moving to an engagement of image making, engagement of cinema, which is animation, the presence of animation. In 𝑗ia-Wei's work, we see the utilization of green screen and 3D animation early traced back to spirit writing, which is 2015. And then Tzu Nyen's work, obviously, have even stronger presence in Tea for Time. So maybe we can invite 𝘠𝑗ia-Wei to talk about this particular dimension of thinking about animation, or maybe thinking about what's beyond editing, right? The moment of database, the moment of beyond the cinematic mechanism that has been touched upon, maybe in Marianne Doan's work.
You see, from the 2017, Tzu Nyen has been working on the critical dictionary of South Asia series, and he collaborated with program designer to make a video work that generated instantly and edit automatically. And it happened that I also used a similar approach to make this work. The drums, frosty beds, and the testimony of the deceased in 2017. And I also collaborate with a program designer to make a program that automatically edit the image. And I just build a database, and that is run by itself. So I would like to start from this point, that how we work with this database from the cinematic perspective. In the critical dictionary of South Asia, Tzu Nyen didn't shoot the film, and this time he didn't even edit. He just leave it all to the program to generate video in real time, right? And he collect a large amount of video footage to create an ever-growing database. Then he used the 26 of alphabet to develop keywords about South Asia, and then categorize them, and that the program edit the film in real time. And because this section, our topic is cinema, so I would like to discuss this approach from cinematic perspective. Even the most traditional film has something to do with database. Database and narrative, two seemingly contradictory things, are often in a competitive relationship. Let's look closely at the working process of a filmmaker. We will find that the material accumulates during the shooting will start to build a database. Usually the shooting schedule is not based on the order of the film narrative, but follow the production's logic. For example, if an actor too busy, film crew will shoot all the scenes that actor involved in a few days. Or sometimes they will focus on filming the scenes related to the venue they rented over in a few days. As you can see, the shooting schedule is mainly based on actual conditions, such as production budget, schedule, people, or equipment. It's not follow the story timeline at all. And after the filming, a database will be formed. And then the editor will develop the narrative path from this database. So therefore, every film faces this kind of back and forth between database and narrative in one way or another. And Tzu Nyen, the critical dictionary of South Asia, further intensifies the role of the database in this process. The database itself is the body of the work, not just the preparatory work for form a narrative. Then he used this database as a basis to extend the multiple narrative meaning. The narrative of this kind of database is like an encyclopedia. An encyclopedia seems to be neutral and objective with no narrative. But what kind of methodology, cultural background, and cosmology they use to organize these entries creates a narrative behind them. This kind of encyclopedic narrative is like the development of zoology and botany in the colonial era. Like the East India Company colonies, they used a complete set of modern flora and fauna to classify and interpret their colonial nature, environment, animal, and plants. So let's look at database from this perspective. We can also see that digital objects in the digital age have the same characteristic, such as a program in our everyday life. It's to build a database, and then the program designer gives it logic to run. The nature of this digital object is a method of organizing things. So a program has its ideology, cultural background, and the worldview behind it. And we can also look at AI, which is often discussed nowadays. There's numerous sets of database behind every AI. Then the AI has the logic to work in the database learn from it, and generate the results. AI is using this kind of database narrative approach. This kind of encyclopedic storytelling of the colonial era has become even more visible in today's digital world. In the past, the story in the films was more important than the database behind it. But in today's digital age, the database itself has stronger power. So let's look back at Tzu Nyen's work from the point of view of this database narrative. I think he's using the power of today's database to deconstruct the framework of modernity, such as the professional field established by modernity, or the diverse cosmology view that has been erased under the concept of modernity. He is critical of this kind of modernity, and he is also aware of the tool, database, used behind it. So this is how I think he used the enemy's tool, database, to reconstruct this framework of modernity. The database that Tzu Nyen built allow many seemingly unrelated elements in the context of modernity to reconnect with one another through a real-time operation of keyword and program. So we can see the various cosmology and time are treated equally in the critical dictionary of Southeast Asia, or T for time. Like things relate to people, objects, beliefs, and politics are all broken up and then reassembled again. So this is how I found from this, but also I'm thinking about this from my own practice.
Once again, thank you very much for that. And this usage of the algorithmic systems or database, it's for me forms an interesting kind of connection to what I mentioned earlier about the nameless and the timeline, and the at least two timelines running when we are watching the nameless. For me, it creates a kind of connection because when I was thinking about the critical dictionary of Southeast Asia, before I had arrived at the idea of using an algorithmic system to automate the edits, my main problem was that I found it very violent to reduce all the ideas into a single timeline. I couldn't think of what film I could make that runs linearly, that would be able to express the heterogeneity which is Southeast Asia. So the way, I guess, in which I approached it was to refuse that one timeline, which in a certain sense took me out of cinema, because in cinema one always has to edit all the possibilities that you have gathered from the shooting. You have to decide to edit it down into one timeline, which is the best of all possible combinations, right? Which is the finished film. So I think having the algorithmic systems allowed me to stay indecisive, which I enjoy. But how to make the indecision become concrete as a work, I think that was kind of how the dictionary took its form, right? And for me, that form was intimately related to the contents, which is this heterogeneous and dynamic region of Southeast Asia. So kind of like finding this resonance between contents and form. Yeah. So I wanted to share these two pictures. It's of the same installation downstairs in the exhibition. So actually this is made up of two works. What is projected on the screen is the Critical Dictionary of Southeast Asia. And in front of that, you see this accordion fold book. This is called F for fold. And you see these lights that are kind of like small spotlights shining on a particular page. So each of these pages has one letter of the alphabet coming from the dictionary. So this small spotlight is synchronized to the same system which is editing the film in real time that is being projected in front. This same system is also triggering a set of LED lights which is behind the projection screen. So the screen is sort of double-sided. On the front, we have projection, and from the screen is porous, so from the back, you have these LED lights. So whenever the algorithms decide how many blinks of the LED lights, the intensity of the lights, and sometimes it erases the image which is projected from the front, but it is always synchronized to that small light shining on the page of the book. So in the video and the book, they're always on the same letter of the alphabet. So this is a kind of a system, but also a kind of generation, to use a kind of fixed system in order to generate different possible models or different possible renders out of the same database, out of the same parameters, was something that I found interesting with this mode of working, And I just also wanted for me to kind of think about this presence of lights, which earlier we've brought up, that lights in my work are not just the light of projection, but often theatrical lights. And I spoke earlier about how theater for me is a way of pushing you out of the image to make you self-conscious. And I would say it's quite literally this. When the light kind of blanks out the projected image, and suddenly what you see is the dark room, which is usually in the dark, you can't see, but now you feel this light in space. So this kind of push-pull rhythm is kind of something I would say I find recurrent in my own work. And maybe just as a last kind of like speculation, earlier we spoke about this self-reflexive moment in a film where you expose all your equipment. And I said that just adds like another layer of fiction. It continues. So this showing the equipment and getting lost in the narrative is also for me a kind of push-pull rhythm, Yeah. Maybe I'll stop here for now.
Although we are running out of time, it's a bit of pity that we couldn't really further expand the conversation. I think both artists will have quite a lot to share on the related topic. However, I'm mindful of time. I also wish all of you go down and enjoy Tzu Nyen's exhibition. In a sense, before we kind of wrap it up, any of you would like to share your thoughts or questions? In a sense, they will be around, so you can definitely capture them and then carry on the conversation. But if you would like to share your thoughts, comments, or questions with this collective at this present in time, right? Please raise your hand. We'll bring the mic to you. Any questions? Any thoughts or comments?
Thank you for the lecture, and then I'm really fond of your work, the Tea for the Time, and then actually I come back like two times to try to finish the whole exhibition, and then after I watch your work, the first impression is like Chris Marker, Godard, and then John Evans. And then those kind of guys are like the father of use the second-hand sources of video to make film. And then at the first section of the lecture, you also talk about like Pasolini, and then, of course, in your work, Ozu. And then I'm just wondering if you can talk about like the influence that you got, because I suppose that you must have a line, like a linear line, that how you look up and how do you study from these masters. Yeah, because after I watched the Tea for the Town, first thing popped up in my mind is the Sunless by Chris Marker. And Chris Marker is like a director that I look up to, and then an intellectual that I look up to. So maybe you can demonstrate or go a bit further about that. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question. I think cinema is definitely a very critical part of my trajectory. But I would say I wanted to say I was a cinephile. So and I also started thinking, why do I use it in the past tense? So the films that I would say really were critical for me, as you've mentioned many of the names that were important to me. But if Pasolini's films, especially Teorama, was a huge influence for me. But if I were to kind of sum them up and forget to mention, there are too many names to mention. But if I just had to choose two, I would say for me, Andrei Tarkovsky and Jean-Luc Godard would be, kind of key influence. Also because I think of them as the opposites. Tarkovsky with these long shots in which time kind of takes on a physical form in his long choreographed shots, That kind of completely opened my mind up to a different way of conceiving of time. So Tarkovsky's book, very famously, he wrote a sculpture in time. So the long shots, in how he choreographed the movement of a camera and what is in front of the camera, creates a kind of time pressure. So that time pressure kind of gives a physical plastic shape to time. So I would say this is it continues to be a huge influence for me. So even when I do 3D animation, usually I tell the animators I don't want any cuts. But it totally makes no sense to have no cuts in animation, but still, it's a kind of aspiration I have in this kind of long rhythms. And I would say Godard is the opposite, right? So he is kind of I would say the great modernist, in his ideologically, as well as how that translates technically into his works. And I would say he's also the great user of video, from film as a transition to video. So maybe the last, other than just these kind of influences and big names, I would say that my relationship to cinema is very much formed by the fact that I could never use celluloid film. I could never afford to use film. So I have always found it impossible to call myself a filmmaker because film refers to the negative, the print, So it's a medium which when I started making my first work, Utama, Every Name in History is I wanted to make a Tarkovsky film, but I had only 5,000 Singapore dollars, and I could only use DV, digital video, not even HD at that time. So immediately for me, film is something beyond my capacity in Singapore. So in the beginning, I always felt like I lacked something. It's like I don't have the budget, to be a true filmmaker. So video was always something a little bit sad for me. But very soon, my ideas about video changed to the opposite, So that lack, the cheapness of video, the promiscuity of video, which is what is video, right? A YouTube clip that you download is video, something you shoot on your phone is a video. Somehow that promiscuity began to attract me, and I see that video is the inherent medium for a Singaporean artist, it's in Southeast Asia where we, have pirates and piracy, So I would say my relationship to cinema, has to be thought, for myself, I kind of think of it in these terms in relation to video and where we are, which is in Singapore, where there's not even a lab where you could develop 35 mm, right? So if I had to shoot on 35 mm, I had to fly a crew in from Thailand. So it just no longer makes sense to think about film, So video, I would say, is, yeah.
What do you think is a pity? Because like the master that you just mentioned, like 𝐒𝐿𝐫𝐞𝐞𝐧𝐢𝐬𝐴, the always film, and it's kind of like lost. There's a lack of like seriousness. There's lack of seriousness.
Seriousness.
Like, yeah. Don't you find like it's a bit?
Yes.
I wouldn't say maybe not a pity, but something that we should look into in Singapore. I mean, I'm not local.
Yeah.
I came back to serve the
National
Southeast
service.
Asia, which is another country.
Sure.
I've never lived in Singapore. I come back to serve. I grew up in China and America.
Yeah.
And then when I come back here, it's find like the art here is more tend towards that side.
Yes.
And you know what? I grew up with art movement. I grew up with all sorts of stuff, like remember 𝐒𝐿𝐫𝐞𝐿𝐫𝐿𝐿 style which since middle school. So, and when I come back here, I really, I wouldn't say this, of course, like there's something right on, but there's a history. There's no classic period in Singapore. And the new thing, like, because when you mention this master, it's like, I happen to use Singapore, 追日, you go look for these traditions. Like, don't you find that type of thing in Singapore is really, you don't find this.
Maybe just a quick reply because we are out of time. Yeah. Which is that seriousness that you speak about is something, greatly important to me. But I would say that is a model of the past. And this model comes from somewhere else, which is to say that we have to reinvent our own kinds of seriousness, what we think is seriousness, So I think it's, one can play a game very well based on rules that exist, that come to us from somewhere else. But maybe it's more interesting to think about reinventing the rules. We make our own rules rather than to play the game according to ready-made rules. But at least for me, videos seem to promise that possibility of reinvention. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that note, and I think it inspires maybe develop related project and program in the future. But in mindful of time, may I invite everyone to join me and thank you, both authors and speaker, to share their insight with us today. And thank you for being here. Wish you a wonderful weekend. Thank you.